Chapter 1. When Concern Turns into Something Else. They said they were worried about me. At least, that is how it started. A dizzy spell in a parking lot, and suddenly my children were in my house every day, checking my pills, questioning my memory, whispering behind closed doors. I pretended not to notice until the day I found a printed packet on my table, prepared for a conservatorship hearing with my name already typed in the section for the person whose life would be taken away. And while they rehearsed their story about my fading mind, I built something stronger, something they never expected, an irreversible decision that would leave them frozen in a courtroom as a judge asked why they wanted control over a woman who owned nothing they could take. My name is Eleanor Whitford, and this is how I stopped my own children from rewriting the final chapter of my life. I was 72 when I realized that growing old in Bloomington came with a different kind of quiet. Not the peaceful kind, the watchful kind, the kind where every move you made was suddenly under someone else's microscope. I had been retired from my position as Human Resources Director at North River Health Network for 5 years and had settled into a predictable rhythm. Morning walks past the community lake, afternoons tending the roses along my fence, evenings reading by the kitchen window while the last bit of Minnesota daylight faded across the yard. Then came the dizzy spell in the grocery store parking lot. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. I held on to the cart, breathed, and straightened up again. A kind young woman asked if I was all right. I told her I was fine. I drove home slowly, made a cup of chamomile tea, and chalked it up to standing too quickly. I never imagined those 3 seconds would become the justification my children needed to rewrite the entire story of my life. Daniel showed up the next morning. He's 46 now, works at Lakeshore Capital in downtown Minneapolis, and carries himself like a man who believes preparedness is a virtue as long as he is the one doing the preparing. He stood in my doorway with a grocery bag in his hand. "Mom, I brought a few things. You need more electrolytes, and maybe you should think about not driving for a bit." His eyes scanned the hallway, then the kitchen, then the counters, as if the house itself could reveal how fragile I had suddenly become. A day later came Rebecca. She's 43, bright, stylish, painfully conscious of how she appears online. She arrived with a smile too wide to be real. "Mom, I just want to check in. I heard you weren't feeling well." She reached for my pill organizer without asking, flipping the lid open to count the tablets. She asked how often I forgot them. She asked if I wrote things down. She asked whether I ever felt confused at night. Her tone was sweet, but her gaze was studying me the way I once studied employees during disciplinary meetings, as if she were collecting data. Within a week, they began appearing together. They followed me into the kitchen. They watched how I chopped apples. They looked at the expiration dates on my cereal. I kept telling myself this was care, but care has warmth. This was something else entirely. One afternoon, Rebecca returned carrying a folder with a blue plastic cover. She placed it on my dining table and slid it toward me. "Mom, this is just a routine health evaluation. At your age, it is smart to stay on top of things." I opened it. The first few pages were harmless enough. Basic medical history, daily habits. Then I reached the last page. At the bottom, tucked into a paragraph of dense text, was a phrase that froze me. "Authorization for emergency financial management in circumstances deemed necessary." I looked up at her. "Why is financial management in a health evaluation?" She blinked too slowly. "It is just a precaution. Daniel thought it might help us support you if anything happened." I'd heard enough excuses in my 30 years in HR to recognize when someone was scrambling. I closed the folder and pushed it back to her. Rebecca's smile faltered. That evening, I stepped out onto the back porch to water the basil pots. The kitchen window was open. I heard Daniel's voice from the side yard. "If she signs the paperwork, the rest will fall into place." He kept his voice low, but not low enough. My hand tightened around the watering can. Pieces that once seemed scattered clicked into position with the absolute clarity I had relied on all my career. They were not worried about me. They were preparing for something, preparing to take something. I let the water spill over the edge of the pot and breathed slowly. Confrontation would only push them to move faster. Panic was exactly what they wanted, but information was mine. I had always known what to do with information. For the rest of the evening, I spoke to them as if nothing had changed. I asked Daniel about his latest project at Lakeshore Capital and complimented the jacket Rebecca wore. I kept my tone light. I watched them watch me. After they left, I walked through the quiet house, past the framed photos on the wall, past the narrow staircase I had climbed for more than 20 years. I reached my small office at the end of the hall. I unlocked the filing cabinet and pulled out a metal box where I kept every record that mattered: the house deed, my investment summaries, retirement documents. Papers I had not touched in years, but had always kept precisely organized, because control was something I had spent my life understanding. I set the box on my desk and rested my hands on the lid. The grocery store incident, the folder with hidden language, and the whispered conversation in the yard. I knew a storm when I felt one pressing in, and I knew I would not wait for it to hit. I lifted the lid, inhaled deeply, and began to review everything I owned. It was time to prepare. The next move would be mine. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 2. The Evidence I Wasn't Supposed to See. The next morning, Daniel showed up unannounced again. I heard his car door close before I even reached the bottom of the stairs. He let himself in as if this house in Bloomington already belonged to him and walked straight to the kitchen. I stopped in the doorway and watched him open my refrigerator, scan the shelves, and type something on his phone. He did not notice me until I stepped closer. "What are you writing?" He looked up too quickly. "Just making sure you are eating enough. Your fridge is a little empty." I pointed to the bag of groceries on the counter. "I just bought food 2 days ago." He nodded but continued scrolling. "Mom, sometimes people your age forget what they have. It is not a big deal. It is just something to watch." The way he said, "people your age," made something tighten behind my ribs. I had heard that tone before in meetings where managers tried to force older employees into retirement. Gentle words, sharp intent. Rebecca came that afternoon carrying a box of herbal supplements and a rehearsed smile. She sat across from me at the dining table, pressing the tips of her fingers together as if she were advising a client. "Mom, I was reading an article this morning. Scammers are targeting older adults more and more. They say confusion can set in quickly without anyone noticing." She tilted her head, studying me. "You have always been so independent. I would hate for someone to take advantage of that." I stirred my tea slowly. "Rebecca, do you think I am confused?" Her smile slickered. "No, of course not. I am just saying it would be smart to have a plan. Daniel and I can help with that." I felt the room shift again, as if the air itself carried their intentions more clearly now. They were not easing into something, they were pushing me toward an image that suited their narrative. The next morning, while picking up a sweater Rebecca had left on the dining chair, I noticed a sheet of paper on the table. It had been tucked under her notebook the day before. Conservatorship Consultation Packet, March 2024. The printed header might as well have been written in neon. My mouth went dry. This was not worry or care. This was strategy. I folded the paper exactly as I found it and placed it back. My hands were steady. My breathing was not. In the quiet of my bedroom, I called Vincent Morales in St. Paul. He answered in the same calm voice I remembered from 15 years of navigating workplace disputes together. When I told him what I had found, I heard his chair shift. "Eleanor, if they build a case that you are experiencing cognitive decline, the court can grant them conservatorship. It is rare, but it happens. It is not a fight you want to underestimate." I pressed the phone to my ear, closing my eyes. "Vincent, I am not declining. I am perfectly clear." "I know you are," he said, "but clarity does not matter if someone else controls the narrative." We agreed to meet the following week. When I hung up the phone, my house felt different. Not unsafe, just no longer mine in the way it used to be. Later that afternoon, I returned home from a walk and noticed the voicemail light blinking in the kitchen phone. I pressed play, expecting a telemarketer or a reminder from the pharmacy. Instead, Daniel's voice filled the room. "Hi, Dr. Barrett. This is Daniel Whitford. I am calling about my mother. She has been forgetting quite a bit lately and repeating questions, and we are worried. If you could make a note in her chart that we should monitor her cognitive changes, that would help us prepare for next steps. Thank you." The recording ended, but the echo of his words did not. I leaned against the counter, gripping the edge until my fingers ached. He was building evidence. Fabricated or exaggerated, it did not matter. He was laying groundwork. I replayed the message once more. The tone was polished, the concern carefully staged, exactly the way he must speak to clients when he wants something done without question. Now he was using it on me. But he did not know what I had already done. In late 2022, sensing the distance between us growing and noticing the way Daniel discussed markets and debt with a nervousness he could not conceal, I had quietly redistributed a portion of my assets into temporary accounts. Nothing extravagant, nothing flashy, just enough to give myself options, enough to make sure no one could corner me abruptly. The foresight that had shaped my career had not abandoned me in retirement. The next few days became an exercise in restraint. I watched without reacting. I listened without confronting. I took notes in a small notebook I kept beside the coffee maker, marking dates and words and tone of voice. I told Daniel I would think about letting him help with bills. I told Rebecca I would read her articles. I gave them nothing to push back against. Each evening after they left, I stood in the kitchen and looked out at the small backyard. The maple tree near the fence was beginning to bud again, tiny green leaves pushing through the Minnesota cold. It struck me that growth always happened quietly, strength too. One night I watched the shadows stretch across the grass and felt something settle inside me. Their visits were not about safety, not about care. They were about control. Once I named it, the fear faded, and something sharper took its place. I picked up my notebook, read through everything I had recorded, and closed it with a quiet certainty. Whatever Daniel and Rebecca thought they were protecting, it was not me. And whatever they were reaching for, they were not going to get it. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dark for a moment, letting the truth sit in my chest. They wanted power. I wanted my life back. Only one of us would get what we came for. It was time to decide what my next step with Vincent would be. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 3: The Shield They Never Saw Coming. I met Vincent 2 days later in his office in St. Paul. The air smelled faintly of old books and cedar polish, the same way it had when I first hired him years ago. He listened quietly while I laid out everything that had happened, from the printed packet to the voicemail Daniel left for Dr. Barrett. His expression tightened only once, when I repeated the phrase, "cognitive changes." When I finished, he leaned back and folded his hands. "Eleanor, if they proceed with this, they will come hard. Conservatorship cases can move quickly if a judge believes there is risk, but there is a way to ensure they can never touch your assets." I nodded. "What do I need to do?" He opened a thin folder. "Create an irrevocable charitable trust. Once your assets are transferred, they are no longer yours legally. They cannot be seized. They cannot be folded into a conservatorship. They cannot be reversed. It is final." The word final should have scared me, but it felt like breathing fresh air for the first time in months. I understood permanence. I had lived my life making choices I could stand behind. I could stand behind this one. Vincent continued, "You choose a charity. You define the purpose. Your assets supported. And in exchange, you are protected from anyone attempting to control you through your finances." I sat quietly, absorbing the weight and relief folded inside each sentence. "I do not want Daniel and Rebecca to hate me," I said finally, but I cannot let them take my life from me." Vincent nodded. "This is not about anger. This is about autonomy." He gave me a list of organizations. I took it home and sat at my kitchen table reading through each name until one stopped me. Women Work Reentry, a Minneapolis program helping older women and single mothers return to the workforce. Something inside me settled into place. The next morning, I drove into downtown Minneapolis and walked into the Women Work office. The walls were covered with framed photographs of women in graduation gowns or standing proudly at their new jobs. A woman with dark hair pulled into a low ponytail greeted me with a warm smile. "I am Linda Park," she said. "How can I help you today?" I told her I wanted to understand how the program worked. She walked me through their training, their job placement partnerships, their emergency support fund. When she spoke about a former participant who had gone from homelessness to running a small catering service, her voice grew soft. I could feel her pride. I asked about her own story. She hesitated before answering. "I was laid off at 30 and had no family nearby. I started over with help from a place like this, so now I try to give others the same chance." Her honesty pressed gently against something in my chest. I looked around the room again, at the photos, at her, at the young intern typing in the corner. These were women who knew what it was like to lose control of their lives and fight to regain it. My assets could be more than numbers on paper. They could be fuel. I called Vincent that afternoon and said I was ready. The next 6 weeks moved quietly but steadily. From late May to mid-July 2024, I met with Vincent twice a week, sometimes in his office, sometimes at my home in Bloomington. We reviewed every detail: my Bloomington house valued at roughly $1.1 million, my investment portfolio just under $940,000, my retirement account approaching $420,000, smaller savings accounts I had almost forgotten about. We transferred everything into the trust, with signatures and notarizations and bank confirmations. There was no drama, only precision. By July 15th, it was complete, finalized, irrevocable. I walked out of the bank feeling lighter than I had in years. The air tasted different. I no longer lived at the mercy of anyone else's intentions. For a short while, I allowed myself to hope that Daniel and Rebecca would sense something had shifted and rethink their plans. Hope, I reminded myself, was not a strategy. In early August, just as the sun began setting later and the evenings grew cooler, a sudden knock sounded on my front door. When I opened it, Daniel and Rebecca stood there, not smiling, not pretending. Behind them was a man in a charcoal suit holding a leather portfolio. Daniel stepped inside without waiting for permission. "Mom, we need to talk." Rebecca followed, her voice tight. "This is important. Please sit with us." The man introduced himself. "I am Mark Ellison. I have been assisting your children with planning for your long-term care." I sat down because standing would have made me look defensive. They spread documents across my dining room table, papers filled with paragraphs and diagrams, medical projections, financial charts. Rebecca spoke with forced patience. "Mom, we want to ensure your future is secure. These decisions are complicated and emotional, but we are trying to take responsibility so you don't have to." Mark nodded. "I strongly recommend signing preliminary agreements today." My hands were still. "You think I cannot make my own decisions?" Daniel exhaled sharply. "Mom, this is for your own good. We are trying to prevent emergencies before they happen." I reached into the drawer beside me and slid out a single envelope. I placed it on the table. "This," I said quietly, "is my decision." Rebecca's brows pulled together. Daniel leaned forward. Mark looked wary. I opened the envelope and withdrew the notarized confirmation of the irrevocable charitable trust. Rebecca whispered, "What is that?" I gave her a moment to read the header. Then her face drained of color. Mark cleared his throat. "Mrs. Whitford, trusts require certain activation steps. It is likely this is not yet effective. If you let me review the documents properly, we can—" It has been effective since mid-July. Every asset listed there is no longer mine. It belongs to the Women Work Re-Entry Trust. Nothing you are planning can touch it." No one spoke. The room felt suspended in the thick silence that follows a truth no one expected to face. Rebecca sank into her chair. Daniel's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing with something like disbelief. After a long moment, Daniel stood. "You have no idea what you just did." He walked out without waiting for my reply. Rebecca followed, pausing only once at the door to look back at me with a mixture of shock and something too bruised to name. An hour later, my phone buzzed, a message from Daniel. "Mom, you just caused something big." I saved it, not because it hurt me, but because it clarified exactly where we were headed next. Whatever they were planning would no longer unfold at my dining room table. It would unfold in court. When the house finally grew quiet, I sat down on the living room sofa. The lamp beside me cast a soft gold pool of light across the rug. I let out a slow breath I felt like I had been holding for months. I had protected more than my assets. I had protected the part of myself that refused to be erased. For the first time in a long while, I felt the weight in my chest lift. The storm outside had not passed, but at least now I had shelter. And in the stillness of that quiet room, I allowed myself one small, steady thought. I was ready for whatever came next. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 4: Courtroom, where the truth finally speaks. Early October arrived with the kind of cold that crept under jackets and along the back of the neck. I woke one morning to find an envelope wedged into my screen door. It was stamped with the seal of Hennepin County. I knew before opening it what it contained. Daniel and Rebecca had filed for conservatorship. They had taken the fight out of my home and into a courtroom. The hearing date was set for the following week. I spent the days leading up to it moving through my routines carefully, not out of fear, but out of intention. I cooked simple meals, I walked around the block, I reread the trust packet Vincent had prepared. Everything was clean and final. There were no loose threads. The morning of the hearing, I stood outside the courthouse steps in Minneapolis and felt the cold wind push against my coat. Vincent arrived a few minutes later. He looked at me with steady eyes. "Eleanor, whatever happens inside that room, remember you are in control of your story." I nodded. "I am ready." Inside the courtroom, the fluorescent lights hummed faintly. The judge sat elevated behind a tall wooden bench. To my left sat Vincent. Across the aisle, Daniel and Rebecca were already seated with their attorney. Mark Ellison perched behind them, hands folded, gaze fixed on the table. Daniel avoided my eyes. Rebecca looked down at her lap, twisting a tissue between her fingers. The judge began reviewing the file. Then Daniel stood when his name was called. His voice was calm, almost tender. "Your Honor, my sister and I love our mother very much, but she has shown signs of declining cognitive abilities. She forgets her medication. She repeats purchases at the grocery store without remembering she already has the items. She has become vulnerable." Vulnerable. The word made my throat tighten, not from fear, but from the audacity of it. He was painting me as a fragile figure he barely recognized. The judge motioned for Rebecca. She rose hesitantly. "Mom has always been strong, but lately she gets confused about dates. She once called me and asked the same question 3 times in an hour. We are only trying to help." Half-truths are more dangerous than lies. They sound believable. I sat still as they spoke, as if I were a case file instead of their mother. When the judge finally turned to me, I felt my spine straighten. "Mrs. Whitford, do you have anything to say at this time?" I glanced at Vincent, then met the judge's eyes. "I would prefer my attorney speak for me." The judge nodded. Vincent stood, then remained silent for a moment, letting the room settle before he spoke. Your Honor, we will respond in full, but I request that before accusations of cognitive decline proceed further, we hear from the individual who has evaluated Mrs. Whitford for the past 15 years, Dr. Alan Barrett. Dr. Barrett approached the witness stand with the calm confidence of a man accustomed to delivering truth without embellishment. He placed one hand on the railing and addressed the judge directly. Mrs. Whitford is fully oriented, coherent, and capable of managing her own affairs. I have seen no indication of cognitive impairment. She shows normal age-related forgetfulness at most. She is mentally sound. Rebecca's head dropped. Daniel's jaw tightened. The judge made a note, then looked toward Vincent. Proceed. Vincent gathered the folder beside him and stepped forward. Your Honor, even if there were concerns about capacity, which Dr. Barrett has just refuted, conservatorship requires that the individual possess assets requiring oversight. In this case, that is not applicable. The judge raised an eyebrow. Explain. Vincent handed a set of bound documents to the clerk. Mrs. Whitford established an irrevocable charitable trust in July of this year. All of her property, including her Bloomington residence, investment accounts, and retirement funds, have been transferred to the trust. These assets are now owned by the Women Work Reentry Trust. They are not available for court control and cannot be considered in a conservatorship petition. They no longer belong to Mrs. Whitford. A ripple of discomfort passed through the courtroom. The judge scanned the documents, turning several pages slowly. Then he looked toward Daniel. Mr. Whitford, if your mother has no personal assets remaining, what exactly are you petitioning to manage? Daniel opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked at Rebecca, but she was crying silently, tissue pressed to her face. Mark Ellison stared at the floor. The judge closed the folder. This petition lacks grounds, both medically and financially. It is denied. The sound of the gavel was sharp and final, not triumphant, not dramatic, just final. As we exited the courtroom, Daniel brushed past me without a word. Rebecca paused near the door, her eyes red. She whispered something that faded before it reached me. Maybe it was apology. Maybe it was anger. I did not ask her to repeat it. Outside, under the gray October sky, Vincent buttoned his coat and turned toward me. You can pursue a countersuit if you want. What they attempted was serious. I shook my head. I do not want to punish them. I only wanted to protect myself. He nodded, as if he had expected that answer all along. Then you have already succeeded. The wind picked up, sending a cold rush across my face. I inhaled deeply. The courthouse behind me felt heavy with everything that had just unfolded, but stepping away from it felt like stepping into a new season. The street was quiet except for the rustling leaves skimming across the pavement. I walked toward the corner, feeling the weight that had lived in my chest for so long begin to lift. My life was still mine. My voice was still mine. The air was cold, but I felt lighter as I left the courthouse steps. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 5. The Only Control That Truly Matters. I spent the rest of October moving through my days quietly. The leaves along my street in Bloomington shifted from gold to brittle brown, and the early dark settled over the neighborhood before dinner each night. For the first time in months, no one knocked on my door. No one lectured me about medicine or safety or confusion. My house felt like mine again, even in the silence. Daniel did not call. Rebecca stayed off my doorstep. Weeks passed without a single message from either of them. I knew they were processing their defeat in court, rearranging their story of what happened, rewriting me into whatever version made it easier to accept that their plan had not only failed, but been exposed. Then, on a cold morning in early November, I opened my email and saw Rebecca's name. She asked if we could talk. She wrote that she wanted clarity and that Daniel would join if I agreed. There were no apologies in the message, only a kind of restrained urgency. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing a simple yes. We met 2 days later at a small cafe near Loring Park in Minneapolis. The place was almost empty. A young barista handed me my coffee with a sleepy smile, and I took a seat by the window. A few minutes later, Rebecca walked in, her shoulders hunched inside a pale coat. Daniel followed close behind, stiff and guarded. They sat across from me. None of us spoke for several seconds. The sound of milk steaming behind the counter filled the room. Rebecca finally lifted her eyes. "Mom, I feel like you misunderstood what Daniel and I were trying to do." I took a sip of my coffee and waited. She tried again. "We were scared. You have been so independent, but things happened fast at your age. We just wanted to make sure you were protected." Daniel cleared his throat and leaned forward slightly. "We were trying to plan for emergencies, that is all. We were not trying to take anything from you." I studied their faces. They looked smaller than they had in the courtroom, less certain, less armored. But uncertainty was not truth. I let out a slow breath. "Did either of you ever ask what I wanted, even once?" Rebecca blinked rapidly. Daniel looked away. I set my cup down. "You said you were worried about me, but was your worry about my safety or about what you believed I owned?" Daniel straightened. "Mom, that is not fair." "Is it not?" I said quietly. "You built a case to take control of my life, not because I was lost or confused, but because control benefits someone, and that someone was not me." Rebecca's chin trembled. "We did not want to lose you." I shook my head. "You wanted to own the parts of my life that were never yours." The words hung between us, sharp but honest. None of us looked away. For the first time, I spoke without protecting their feelings. My house and my savings and my investments were not created so either of you could pay debts or maintain an online image. They were created to give me freedom and to help someone who needed it. And now they will. Hundreds of women will walk into new jobs and stable lives because of the resources you tried to seize. Rebecca pressed her fingers to her forehead. I did not realize how much pressure I was under. I keep thinking if I present myself well enough, everything will stay together. I did not want to tell you what was going on. It felt embarrassing. Daniel stayed quiet for a long time. His voice was low when he finally spoke. "I thought you would be relieved to have us handle things. I thought I was being responsible. But when the judge asked what we were trying to manage, I saw myself clearly. It was not flattering." I nodded. Awareness usually is not. Rebecca wiped her cheek and looked at me softly. "Does this mean you do not want us in your life anymore?" I shook my head again. "I did not choose distance. You did, when you replaced care with ambition. I am not shutting the door on either of you, but I am leaving it open on my terms." A long silence settled at the table. Not heavy, simply real. For once, they were looking at me as a person, not a possession. I felt no triumph, just a quiet steadiness. Daniel exhaled. "I respect what you did, even if I don't like it." I managed a small smile. "You are not required to like it, only to accept that it was necessary." Rebecca nodded slowly, as if she understood something she had been resisting for far too long. "You are stronger than we realized." I reached for my coffee again. "I always was. You were just looking in another direction." We talked for a while longer, nothing dramatic, nothing resolved completely, but the energy had shifted. They understood a line had been drawn, and that crossing it again would cost them more than assets. It would cost me. When we finally stood to leave, the afternoon light had dimmed, casting soft blue shadows across the street. I watched them walk to their car together. They moved slowly, almost uncertainly, as if recalibrating their place in my life. On the drive home, the sky was streaked with thin clouds, and early winter air drifted through the crack of my window. I felt neither sorrow nor anger, only clarity. My life was still mine, not because a court protected me, but because I chose to protect myself long before the courtroom doors opened. Back in Bloomington, I hung my coat by the door and switched on the small lamp near the hallway. Its warm glow filled the quiet house, the same house where my children had tried to redefine my future, the same house I saved by letting it go. I sat down in my living room and let everything settle in my chest. Not victory, not revenge, just the calm that comes when you reclaim something that should never have been threatened in the first place. Before turning off the light, I allowed myself one final thought. Autonomy is a kind of love too, the kind you give yourself when no one will. And if my story means anything to anyone listening, it is this: your life is yours to shape, yours to guard, and yours to honor. No matter your age, no matter your past, no matter who tries to take that power from you. If you have walked with me through this journey, tell me what part stayed with you. Share your thoughts, share your strength, and stay with me for the stories yet to come.